recruiting can be a very meaningful role because you're talking to literally so many people, so many different backgrounds. You hear so many different stories. I was a recruiter even during the pandemic, which you can imagine. Like that's when you get people who are like very desperate to find a job or like many different stories. And so, but after a while, recruiting can get a bit repetitive, especially if you work at a company like mine that was a what we call an RPO. So basically, we work for clients and we do recruiting on behalf of clients. So it was very high volume. And that's where I thought, okay, I need to go and work for a bigger company that gives me bigger benefits and a bigger paycheck.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. If you are a Latina who has been curious about how to break into tech, or even if there is room for more Latinas in tech, you have come to the right episode because today I'm excited to share an amazing conversation with Cynthia Vargas Hernandez. This is a Latina that I know, a Latina that I had the opportunity to connect and just celebrate, right? Hasta pachanguear, ¿por qué no? Cynthia, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am so honored to be here today and share a little bit more about my story and answer any questions that you or your audience may have.
I love it. So let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your story. Where are you from and how did you ended up working in tech?
Yes, of course. So I'm originally from Mexico City, born and raised. I spent the majority of my life in Mexico. And I actually ended up in the US because of love. I moved here because of love. And when I was an exchange student, I met who is my today husband. And so that's what brought me originally to the US. But everyone in my family is still back in Mexico. And I come from a family that has roots in Mexico City, but my mom's side of the family is from the beautiful state of Oaxaca.
I love it. Now I'm like soy bien chismosa, so we're gonna be sharing a little bit of your personal life and switching between
Yeah.
English and Spanish. You were an exchange student, which I will make the assumption that you probably were someone who was middle class in Mexico before moving to the U.S. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. I will say too that I am the product of two very hardworking parents, blue collar jobs. My dad had always been in the door repair business, always with a ladder and equipment and, full of dirt and grease and all the things that a blue collar worker, characteristic of. And then my mom, right now she's retired, but she worked for almost 40 years for the government at a small clinic in Mexico. And so I say I'm a product of two very hardworking parents, yes, middle class, and I'm a product of people that believed in me and scholarships. Because my
Love.
whole life I was on scholarships, and because of course my parents couldn't necessarily afford education for me alone. Because in Mexico, when you want to learn how to speak English, for example, you do need to go to a private school. But private schools, of course, cost money. It's not the same as private schools here in the US, but I am definitely the product of those two things.
Me encanta, me encanta. And shout out to the parents. So you talk about scholarships and how you're a product of scholarships. And I was like, yes, thank you to the people that help so many people because that's also part of being wealthy, where you don't feel afraid of redirect dollars to students to help them. So now let's get into how did you ended up starting at Microsoft? So you moved here because of love. Did you had your professional career already, or did you go to school here, or how did that look like for you?
Yes. No, that's a great question. So when I moved to the US, I was still very early in career. I was 24 when I moved to the US. So I recently had graduated college. I went to a good university back home. And so when you go to a good university, that of course opens a lot of different doors for you, right? But when you move outside of Mexico and, when you move to the States, that big name school doesn't really mean anything here. And so I had to start over. And it's interesting because when the first job that I had right after college in Mexico was in accounting. It was for a big company, but it was in accounting. And it was not because I liked accounting or that I wanted to pursue a career in accounting, but I was a broke student that needed a job and that wanted to get experience, right? So, like, like your parents basically tell you, like, mija, like, that's a job, like,
Lo que
take it,
caiga.
like, lo que caiga es bueno. And so I'm like, okay, yeah, like, I'll do that. And so naturally, when I moved here to the US, I was looking for jobs in accounting, but I couldn't find any. Like, Lucy, I think I applied to over 100 different jobs
Wow.
and no one was calling back. And in my mind, there were potentially two things happening. The first one is that people would probably see my previous experience, my education, etc., not being in the US and probably assume that I didn't have the skills or even work permit to work in the US. And then the other thing that I think was happening was that I to be an accountant here in the US, you need to be a CPA and you need to go through additional education that honestly I wasn't willing to go through because I didn't like accounting. I think that after, of course, unas lloraditas, like a little bit of tears and like frustration, I thought, okay, maybe this is the time for me to rethink my career and think about what else I would want to do that I actually like. And so I started applying to HR roles, which is something that I had been more interested in since I had graduated. And I applied to different companies and landed my first job as an entry level recruiter. And that's where I took my first step into HR. And I haven't really looked back since because now my whole career I've spent at this point, it's been almost 10 years in HR in different roles within HR. And so the click down to that comes after a few years in recruiting. Now, recruiting can be a very meaningful role because you're talking to literally so many people, so many different backgrounds. You hear so many different stories. I was a recruiter even during the pandemic, which you can imagine. Like, that's when you get people who are like very desperate to find a job or like many different stories. And so, but after a while, recruiting can get a bit repetitive, especially if you work at a company like mine that was what we call an RPO. So basically, we work for clients and we do recruiting on behalf of clients. So it was very high volume. And that's where I thought, okay, I need to go and work for a bigger company that gives me bigger benefits and a bigger paycheck. Cause, like, I think
Girl,
that's what we all want, right? We want, like, I wanted to have.
yes, bigger paycheck and bigger benefits. She's a Latina and she's saying it out loud. So I
Yeah,
love this for you. I was like, let me clap for you right now. Thank
thank
you
you.
so much for saying that because the audacity to say, I want better and I want also more money, it's something that Latinas struggle with. And with your experience as a former recruiter, did you see women struggling with asking for their worth or how, like, can you give us a little bit of like behind the scenes if you can, by the way, I want to be respectful.
Of course, absolutely. Lucy, that is such a great question because in one of my I remember specifically a call with a woman, and this was during the pandemic, and we were hiring. I think it was pharmacy technicians. I don't remember, but it was something like that, and it was an hourly job. And this was before, because in certain states, it was still allowed to ask for, like, how much are you making now? Or, like, what are your salary expectations, right? And so, as recruiters, you already know the range and you know where you can be flexible and where, like, that's a definite no, or where it's potentially like, hey, this is cheap labor, so to speak, right? And I remember this woman telling me, like, my salary expectations are I'm gonna give you a number. It wasn't that number because I can't remember, but let's say it was $10 an hour. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, no." And I was like, "Are you sure?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "What about a little more?" But like I didn't want to tell her like I could not share the
Right.
salary range with her, but I was like, go up, like, give me more, more. And so, like, that's where I saw more women giving me a lower number than compared with men. Now, it was not necessarily a universal thing, but like definitely in terms of a like if you think about a trend, it was mostly women who would give me a lower range where I would suggest like, hey, maybe you could go a little higher. And so yeah, like definitely I saw that a lot
Yeah,
happen.
thank you for sharing. And I mean, in the middle of the pandemic, I think people just want to or wanted to just get whatever, right? Because there was no thinking about what is going to happen in the next year because so many of us didn't know what was happening. But I had experience hiring people with my previous career, and I saw how women always like shrunk and say like, oh,
Mhm.
like poquito or whatever. But the men were like, will stand up and say, well, you can pay me like three times what you're offering. And I was like, whoa,
Yeah,
that's a lot of confidence, which, I'm
yeah.
not saying that it's bad, but also just leveraging your expertise and the skill set that you have. Now, Cynthia, you are now an HR business partner at Microsoft, and I want to know, like, what does that look like for you now?
Yeah, yeah, of course. So an HR business partner, and this is something that again, after like thinking about my journey, after thinking, hey, I don't want to do recruiting anymore, but I want to continue in the HR side of the business. I decided to go back to school and get my MBA. And so I thought that the MBA was going to be the tool that was going to give me access to bigger companies with, again, a bigger paycheck and better learning opportunities. Now, I will say that the company that I was working for previously, because it was smaller or medium size, the benefit that you get from working at a smaller company is that you get so much experience because you do a little bit of everything. And I had incredible leaders that allowed me to do that. I even lived in the UK for a couple of years, worked for Latin American clients. So it gave me a lot of great experience. So I wanted to take that to the next level and got my MBA. During that time, I got an internship at Microsoft, and that's how I landed at Microsoft. They do have a rotational program specifically for HR professionals, where in 3 years, you go through three different rotations, all within HR, and you can choose kind of like where you want to go. um the I don't want to say the ultimate role in HR, but like one of the most strategic roles that you can find in HR is the HR business partner. And that is because you are aligned to a leader and you support that leader in their business strategy, their people strategy. Are People think about HR as like, oh, I don't know, like almost like therapy, right? Or
Or the person that you don't want to ever see, right?
exactly. Or the person like people are scared of HR or they think that we're the bad guy. But it's not true. I've seen where strong leaders, if they leverage HR, if they have HR in the room, they can make better decisions because at the end of the day, a company does not run itself. It's people that run a company,
Right.
right? And so HR is there to support a leader to accelerate and enable the business. And that's what the HR business partner does. Now, at a company like Microsoft, there are, I don't know, I'm just giving you probably a fake number, but let's say 1,000 HR employees. And so that's a huge number, right? And so that means that there's even people with an HR title, they may never talk to an employee because they're in HR operations. They may be working on the technology side of HR. And so there's many different flavors that HR can take depending on the company size, the company priorities, etc.
Love that. Now, you mentioned having a leader that believe in you throughout the conversation. So, how did that look like for you after you signed up for the internship? Did you have to like go and tell someone like, "Hey, can you be my mentor?" Because a lot of Latinas, they have the job, but then once they're there, they're kind of in a way waiting for permission to be quote unquote chosen. Or did you have to be like a little bit audacious and say, "No, I know who I want to be my mentor or my
Yeah.
sponsor, and this is what I'm going to do." Like, can you walk us behind the scene or how that
Yeah.
looked like for you?
Yes, of course. And so, like, at the company, there were like both things happened. There was more of a formal mentorship structure already in place for me because I was part of this program. And of course, being part of a program, there's always some, element of, hey, there are going to be mentors supporting you. But those are mentors that you don't necessarily have a previous relationship with. Now, where I had to be a little bit more audacious was I remember my first year at Microsoft. There was this woman, she's no longer at the company, but there was this woman who walked into the room and I was so like, I had a crush because she was so strong. When she talked, people listened, and she was very determined, and she had clear strategy. And I was like, this woman in a perfect skin. And I'm like, this woman I need to ask her to be my mentor. And so we were at a workshop for a whole week. And I remember at the end of the workshop, I approached her. Like, I remember I was shaking because I was so nervous. I don't know, like a month in. And I said, like, hey, like, I am so impressed by your leadership. And it would be an honor if you could be my mentor and if we could have some regular cadence on the calendar for me to learn from you. And she said yes, and I was like, "Oh my god." I learned a ton from her, and it was also a great way to see the vulnerable side of a leader, right? Who we think is like, "Oh my gosh, that woman is so strong and nothing can like ever break her." Like when you have a mentor that is willing to share that vulnerability side of you, you're like, "Okay, that's me now." It doesn't mean that I cannot be the same strong leader that this person
Yes.
is because it is, like we're all humans. And so that's to answer your question, that I've done both. There was a structure in place for me, but I've also been identifying key leaders that I'm like I want to aspire to be like that person. Therefore, I'm gonna, just reach out and see if she wants to mentor.
Yes. And I love that because, again, so many people just wait. They say, well, if I can just prove myself, which sounds to me like you did a little bit of both. You said, no, I need to go back to school to really hone in on the knowledge that I need for this new move. And then I need to ask. Now, you also mentioned moving to the UK. And as a Latina, when you were saying that, I was like, whoa, this is like good, right? So many people are afraid to leave because they're married to a geographically area. And for you, you're like, I'm gonna go wherever it takes me. So let me in your mind for a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
because I know you and I know you have this like global mindset. And so how has that mentality of I have a global mindset help you make decisions in your career, but also
Yeah.
helping you thrive with Microsoft right now?
Yeah. That is such an interesting question. And I wish more people asked me that because the reality is that companies in the US and when you work in corporate America, it is very US centric. Even when companies have global scope, many operations are very US centric. And so I wish more people asked about like your global mindset. I recently went through a few interviews and I landed a new role. This is like day 4 of my new role. And so I'm super excited about that. But one of the questions that came through the interview was something along the lines of like, tell me about a time when you were uncomfortable or like outside of your comfort zone. And it made me giggle a little bit because I'm I'm an immigrant, right? I've been uncomfortable for the last 10 years. Every day is uncomfortable because I cannot necessarily speak in my like default language and everything is still like not my comfort even though it's like more and more becoming my comfort. But being an immigrant twice is like it definitely makes you appreciate your values because maybe those don't change even if your environment changes, and be flexible with like, hey, there are some things that I have learned from my time in the UK that I'm now taking with me and now, you know, are part of who I am. And just think in like the business environment to like thinking about, hey, who are we solving for? Is this only the US? Have we thought about the other 50% of the population that live outside of the US, our clients who also consume our product outside of the US? And so I think having that global mindset is so important. And it really builds character too, right? Like it makes you think about who needs to be part of the conversation. And if anything, it's also really fun. It's really fun. It comes with a little bit of pain, but it's really fun to be able to explore the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had the opportunity to go to the Microsoft building and experience what it was like to be in that tech environment, if you will, when one of the organizations that we both are part of hosted an event. And to me, just walking into the building and seeing the diversity within just that building itself was so eye opening for me. And so it gave me actually, which I don't think I shared this before at all through the podcast, it gave me the idea of I need to start teaching my clients and my community how to also have the global mindset when it comes to their finances and accessing multiple financial systems, not just the US, because a lot of the people that I help come from Mexico or are first gen Latinas. And so now I'm saying, okay, well, if you have, for example, dual citizenship, you can also invest in the financial system in Mexico. Or if you are, an immigrant from Mexico, you can also participate in both and having that global mindset when it comes to money and the people and the opportunities. That's when I decided, okay, I have to have like a single chapter on my upcoming book related to the
Yes.
mindset of
Yes.
having access to multiple options, which is geographical
Right.
freedom. Now,
Yes.
I want some chisme because I feel like, okay, she's an HR for Microsoft and people probably bug you all the time.
Yes.
How do you set boundaries? Because I mean, you're on LinkedIn, and I can only imagine how many DMs
Yeah.
you get like every single
Yeah.
day from people asking, how can you get into
Yeah.
Microsoft? So, how do you balance that overload of unsolicited requests? And
Yeah.
tell us about the boundaries that you have.
Yeah. Oh, Lucy, I love this question. I don't think, yeah, I love this question. I've been reflecting on that very recently, actually, because not only am I part of, I'm working on my career, but I'm also part of many different organizations, nonprofits, serve on different boards. And that sometimes comes with blurry boundaries, and I need to start protecting them. And I remember, like, of course, having the HR title on LinkedIn and then Microsoft attached to that. People think, and it's not their fault, absolutely. People think, like, oh, she must be the person recruiting or making hiring decisions. And again, like there are 2,000 other HR folks in the company. And sometimes, as an HR business partner, you have no clue. Don't ever really touch a recruiting process. That's the business and talent acquisition. Like HR business partners, we don't really know about that. And so I wouldn't really know how to help you. And sometimes if people tell me like, "Hey, could you connect me to this person?" I'm like, "I don't really know who that is." There's 200,000 employees at Microsoft. So it is very difficult before, and I am a very a highly empathetic person. And so I used to feel really bad for not responding to people. But then I would feel very stressed having to respond to every single person because you I was putting myself in their shoes. And so I'm like, okay, like they're shooting their shot. They're doing what they need to do to get a role, right? But instead what I have thought more recently is like, hey, I'm only going to respond to those requests where I think I can actually be of service and where I can actually help. Meaning, if there's a software engineer reaching out to me asking for a software engineering role, I'm like, I don't think I can help. But if there's someone asking me about an HR position in learning more about HR at Microsoft in tech, I'm like, I can be of service. I can help. And of course, like that with like if I have bandwidth and if I have the time to serve that person. But I think that's where I'm starting to set some of those boundaries and allowing myself to not feel bad for not responding to your point, hundreds of emails, especially in this job market where people are just looking in. I don't blame them. They need to be reaching out, but
Yes.
it's a better strategy if your reach outs are to the right person. And I will say in big companies, it's probably someone with a job title of talent acquisition.
Yeah, no, I learned these when I was through going through the Adobe training. And they told us don't bother people, and it actually made me think of you because I know you, and we have had the opportunity to share multiple stages. And I remember when you interviewed me at Celebrate Latina,
Mm-hmm.
and I could like I that moment I was like, yeah, she totally is a people person, and she loves and cares about people. And so I think from the moment forward, I just became fascinated with how you present yourself, but also how you really love helping people and organizations. And so
Thank
I
you.
didn't have the idea yet of like I have to bring her to the podcast, but as I got to know you more, then I was like, yeah, she need to come to the podcast to share her story of growth, of immigrating, and also audacity and what it takes to essentially have the dream roles that a lot of people just
Yeah.
want, right? But some people just dream about it, and people like you're actually doing it. You're showing up every single day. Now, thank you for sharing that. I love that you're loving my questions because I was like, yeah, I want people to get to know the human side of you, right? Other than just the professional accomplishments, which are super amazing. But
Thank
now I
you.
want to bring you back to you, and I'm like,
Yes.
voy a ser chismoso otra vez.
Please.
Where is your husband in all of these? Like, meaning, how is he supportive to your career? Because I was like, I don't think I know him.
Yes. No, that is such a great question too, because I think, and I've heard many people say this kind of phrase, right? Like the maybe it's been you, Lucy, like who your best financial or career decision is who you marry.
Yeah, that was me.
And thank you. Actually, I'm like, I think it was you. Uh,
Yes, just listening.
and I married an absolute king. Like he is amazing. He supports my career. He like really is so selfless about like, hey, you need to grow. You need to apply to these schools. You need to apply to this company. Like even when sometimes I was like, no, they're gonna say no. Like, oh, why even bother? No, he was the one pushing me. And so that and I say that because I mean, the Latino or like even just more specifically the Mexican culture of machismo, right? Like thankfully my dad was not machista conmigo, but he was machista with my mom. And so like and he's machista with like other women. He was always like I want my daughters to be educated, like of course, but like he would still show many, many, many flavors of machismo growing up and even to this day. But my husband is the complete opposite. And so my husband and I, we've been doing long distance marriage for the last 6 years. He lives in California. And so we're finally, in the next 2 weeks, we're finally closing the distance because he's graduating with his PhD. And so, like, we're finally going to be moving together. But part of us deciding to live apart was because, hey, he had this really great opportunity that I could never say, like, oh, don't go and pursue that. And I had this really good thing going that he was just like, "Hey, you go and work for Microsoft and stay there and like build your career and grow your network." And he was so supportive of that. And I think that's why our relationship has been very strong. And because we have never been a blocker to each other's growth, and instead we've been boosting each other's careers.
I love that. I'm like, let's give him a kudos. I love that. Well, Cynthia, it has been amazing having you here. But before I let you go, I want to ask you, what is your definition of wealth?
What is my definition of wealth? I will say, I think it all goes back to giving back to the people who have given it all for me. And I think maybe that's the first tier, right? Like, I am my parents' definition of success. Like when my parents talk about me and my career and my schooling and my travels, like my dad tells everyone like, "Oh yeah, she's been here and there." I'm like, "That no, yeah." And so like me being their definition of success, it just makes me so, so proud. And so for me, wealth is being able to give some of that love support back to them because they didn't have the chance. And if they did, decided, they were like, no, that's not going to be for me. That's going to be for my daughters. And so wealth is also for me being able to live the life that I enjoy, that I love. Like, for example, I love traveling. And for me, wealth is being able to not think twice about buying a plane ticket.
Yeah.
So that is beautiful. Wealth for me is also thinking about, hey, I now have savings and a 401k. Like, I make it a point to maximize my 401k contributions. I didn't grow up learning anything about that, but like more recently, and actually, Lucy, it was after one of your talks that I was like, okay, what is that? What's even that? And so getting curious on like, okay, cuando sea viejita, like at least I'm going to have this money. I don't dream about like fancy cars. Like, I don't really care about that, but I just want to be able to get the things and experiences that are going to make me and my family happy. So,
Yes, and traveling is such a like it's such an abundant way to spend money because when you
mhm.
go and get to know other people's culture, language, experiences, it makes you a better human being, coming back to like the global mindset. So I'm so glad that you have benefited from listening to me talking about money. And I love that you mentioned like the best investment is who you marry because it is
Yeah.
so true. It
Yeah.
has been an honor having you here. So thank you
Thank you.
so much for coming to the show. And where can people find you?
Yes, people can find me on LinkedIn. And yes, also, I'm the president of Alpha, the Seattle chapter. So you can follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, etc., and come to our events, and you can find me there in person.
And I can attest that they host some of the funnest events because I have been to several and they're always so much fun and there's always food. So thanks again for coming to the show.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you. It was such an honor to be here.